Okay, so for those of you who have just joined us, thank you once again. We have Dr. Gisa Ruga from the Central Queensland University presenting her paper on sustaining educators through professional, collegiate and institutional values and philosophy. So take it away, please, Ruga.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to acknowledge the Whadjuk people of the Perth region, where I'm speaking from today, and their contribution to the communities in the city and past, present and future. So as introduced, we're looking at professional, collegiate, institutional values through teaching philosophies. We can go to the first slide. Thanks, Colin. And there's a little bit of animation. Thank you, just hold it there. So teaching philosophies, just hold there. Teaching philosophies, as you know, have been developed over a period of time. You may have come across it entering academia through a performance review or your annual reporting. And the next tab. And those... thank you. And those generally gives you prompts to develop your personal identity as teacher and educator and connect with your learners. And that's through those three areas of your beliefs, your practice, and your goals for the future. And so teaching philosophies have really formally only developed in the 1990s. Before that, it was really quite more informal, and teaching was really seen as a calling and was developed by educators over a longer period of time. Next tab, please. So what we've seen over the last 20 years is a range of tools developed for individuals to develop their teaching philosophies. And this one is from Dieter Schönwetter, who was part of this research study. And this was really the last seminal paper in 2002. And Dieter has looked at these components, as you can see at the top, beliefs, practices, and goals, and put them into connection with those key areas of teaching and learning, which is your beliefs of teaching, learning, your values, your relationship to students, and so forth. And this is sort of the essence of most of the models that have been around. And next tab, one more tab, please. So I've been engaging in teaching philosophies for over 10 years when I went to my first workshop as I started as academic, and it's fascinated me since then. And pretty much the next year, so that's sort of 9 years ago, I've started to run workshops. And one more tab, please. Helping others to develop their teaching philosophy. And in Australia, we have across multiple universities, and it's also in New Zealand and Hong Kong, called ISSOTL, talking about teaching and learning, which is facilitated through our national HERTSA, Higher Education Research and Development Society of Australasia. So by 2016, a number of facilitators, we got together and published this little workbook. At that time, I realized it had really a transformative impact on me, not just for myself as an individual, but I was sharing it with my colleagues. I helped them set up communities of ISSOTL and talking about teaching, learning, and we were starting to publish. And I felt that started to have an impact on the discipline and the community. You know, we were presenting at conferences like this. So I spoke to my colleagues and said, look, I think teaching philosophies are so much more than what is in the literature. It does go so much beyond the individual, even though that's the most important and transformative experience. And I would like to do some ISSOTL research on this. Next slide, please. So I've talked to some of my colleagues, especially Coralie McCormack, Robert Kennelly, and they encouraged me to talk to Dieter, who wrote the last, that framework that I talked to you about. Next tab, please. And we said, all right, let's make this into an international research study. We're grateful to Professor Schönwetter from Canada that he agreed to be part of the project. And so in 2017, we started this project around what is the value of teaching philosophy for today's academics and their institutions. So trying to connect and extend that meaning of teaching philosophy, which really hasn't done yet. We were very lucky and grateful. We received 2 grants, one from the Canadian Education Development Caucus through the STLHC, which is the Canadian National Society for Higher Education, Learning and Teaching, and then a few years later for the dissemination from HERTSA for when we took our findings to 23 institutions across Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and we gained feedback on this research from over 730 participants. Next tab. So our research team included Coralie and Dieter and Robert, as I said, who Coralie and Robert started the TATL movement in Australia. Dieter is very influential in Canada. And through our grant, we were able to engage Nicole, who worked with Dieter at the University of Manitoba as our research assistant. Next tab. So we're very grateful to have had that support. Tab. Thanks, Cullen. This is going great. This should move up. The research methodology took us about a year to work this out. It was a deeply qualitative inquiry through a purposive study. So it's a small number but very selected educators who had to have between, 5 to 10 and up to 35 years experience. They were Hertz Fellows or 3M Canadian Fellows. And the requisite was they all had to have an engagement with their teaching philosophy over a period of time. They were from different disciplines, different levels of backgrounds, age, gender, and so forth. So we had a really deep sample on that. And so our focus was really then to look at those insights and their journeys and narratives. And final tab for this slide. As I mentioned, we've taken this research to a number of workshops. We've published our conference presentation, and down the bottom, just a few weeks ago now, the full paper has been published with the International Journal for Academic Development. And I've received a grant from my current university. They've paid for the free access fees. So this research, full research, is now freely available internationally. Going to the next slide. So I'm just going in this slide through the key themes of our research, and they really confirm what was my experience from my journey, that the value of teaching philosophies goes so far beyond the individual. In the top, we've confirmed the capacity building for teaching and learning through developing your teaching philosophy, developing your skills of reflective writing, and increasing your motivation. As we just heard from the previous speaker speaking in this group, you could see that energy of working together in the group and developing. And so that beyond that personal development, that collaboration, we were identifying through those responsible participants these engagements in ISSOTL, and they were confident in engaging in situation, and what was so important to find, that collegial context and mentoring. So this individual journey moves into a collegial journey that really, sort of creates that strength of the group. And then that had a ripple effect into the institutions. Now, what we found at the institution level, that's where currently are barriers, in the sense of the institution sees teaching philosophy really still as a formulaic process, as that moment of time where you fill in the form, you respond to a couple of criteria. There is currently a lack of alignment of this TP to the actual holistic development of the individual, of the group, the discipline, or the collegiate that could be activated. And therefore, a lot of the participants said, yeah, we wish this was seen more holistic, it was more deeply noted, and that at more regular times, TP's development was connected to personal and collegial development as well. So we were able to identify that gap. Next little tab, which is a little quote from someone, and I just want to delve into that for a minute. The main benefit I find from writing teaching statement is that it increases my confidence as a teacher. So you can see there that reflexivity of the person who's worked with a teaching philosophy is really seeing that building their own personal confidence, but also the confidence in their own role for the students. And next one, when I'm challenged or facing difficult decisions in my teaching, that's that little word, identifying there is a challenge and facing it and, sort of working through challenges. I often think, does this fit in with me as a good teacher? So this person has the strength and its own values and beliefs made clear to themselves so they can use it as a sounding board. It provides a grounding. And then when there are challenges, as we have, COVID or changes, it provides that sustained resilience for the person. I often think, does this fit in for me as a good teacher? So that's sort of setting that level as a good teacher. And that helps me to be more competent as a teacher. So maintaining that level of, work and connections and resilience. The TP has acted as a rudder for me in my career. And here you can see that metaphor of that longer term perspective through teaching philosophy and saying, I can get through this, I can sustain myself, and there's a longer term journey that I'm ready to, sort of engage in. Next tab. As we were unpacking these narratives and looking at the literature, we saw the factors that were very closely related to the resilience building literature. So we were able to identify a connection with teaching philosophy development over time, building motivation, reflection, self-efficacy, and those relationships. And so now when I'm giving teaching philosophy workshops, I give a lot on resilience and sustaining yourself and making those factors explicit so that someone who is engaging in their teaching philosophy and their personal development can more explicitly now see strengthening of their own journey and your own development. And that has been really important. Next slide, please, which is my final slide. And after that are some references. So from the paper that's published below, and as I mentioned, is now available free access. This is now the new framework that I'm presenting here today in providing that perspective that teaching philosophy value is a progression and that it goes beyond the personal through the professional with organizational connections. And so far we have seen that, and there have been quite wonderful presentations already that showed that motivation as a teacher extends into building academic and collegial confidence and connections. And what I'm proposing now, and that's what I'm hoping perhaps with some participants from this conference, to build a new international research project that looks at that, extending that confidence and collegial connection into the institutional capacity building. So there is now enormous potential to work with teaching learning centers and education developers, as well as discipline managers and leaders, to really strengthen that opportunity of taking personal and professional development into institutional capacity building. And I've mentioned some of those aspects that could be utilized. And each institution already has a number of opportunities that might be looking at the strategic plan from a discipline or a university, that might be looking at capacity and teaching and learning centers and what they're supporting already. So that's the key finding of the research, increasing the value of TP from personal to professional and institutional. And I just want to close here for some questions and feedback. If you're interested, so I'm running more workshops and I'd like to put an international or national cross-disciplinary group together to take this research now to that next level over the next few years. Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, thank you so much for your presentation, and congratulations for delivering it on time, despite all of the technical issues that we had at the start. So you've done a fantastic job there, and we have about 8 minutes for some questions and discussions. So I don't see too many questions being posted in the questions panel, but we do have a small group here. Before we jump, I might just leave this up on screen just for a moment in case anyone is interested in any of those references. And then I'll stop sharing that. So if anyone does have a question or would like to make a comment or anything of that nature, please feel free to turn your microphone and your camera on and perhaps share your thoughts about Gisa's work with her.
Can I start?
Yes, please do.
Gisa, thank you so much. This is fantastic. Such great work. I have 2 questions, comments on both ends of this continuum. One is, obviously, I can see how it empowers you as a teacher in being involved in this project. how did this filter explicitly to your students? Because I'm sure it's reflected in your better teaching, in your reflective teaching, but was it somehow communicated to your students in a very explicit way? So that's one end. The other end is the institutional impact. I totally understand what you mean when you said the institution tends to look at TP in a very formulaic way. And many colleagues also try to look at it from that direction. Having done this great work, did it in any way shifted the institutional culture in the way they look at TP?
Thank you. Two very important questions and two areas of future expansion of this research. On the first aspect, the participants we interviewed confirmed that having a strong TP and developing your identity had a direct and in fact an increasing impact on their students as well. Some of the participants said that they also get to their students to develop their own TP, even as undergraduates. They use TP in a slightly more relaxed way, but to say, welcome to university. What are your current beliefs? What are your values? What are your goals? And the aim is to build their reflective capacity and then come back to that. And as we know, reflection is one of the key aspects for lifelong learning and continued development, and connecting yourself through metacognition. Who am I? Where am I currently in my learning journey? So I think there are several areas of opportunities in that middle section of educator to learner to discipline. And what we found, it depends on your expertise and your confidence as educator at that point in time. The more experienced you are in this field, the more you'll be able to activate the students' engagement through this. But and there were some participants who said the further you go along this progression, you cannot go back. You will go forward. It grows with you. Some even said my teaching philosophy has become my life philosophy. It merges. That was also very powerful. So as you said, your question and my answer is just opening up and scaffolding a lot more windows at that level. Yeah. Now, to your second part, the institutional level is the one, I think, yes, you're right. It's still seeing formulaic as an aspect of progression, review, but not as really capacity building for the institution. From the presentation I've had where I've had deans or DVCs or managers, they realized the potential, but they also weren't sure how this could be activated. So I think I would love to get a workshop together where we have educational developers, faculty members, and maybe some of the DVCs or higher managers together. And I think each institution would have a slightly different journey. I'm a constructivist, and so I really believe in social construct. I believe in constructive alignment, and I've written a paper which demonstrates you can go upwards and you can go downwards and sideways. But the best model is a hybrid model where you have these iterative cycles going up and going down. So it's a bit like I assume it's a bit like developing a collaborative community at an institutional level. You would have to work together and find some ways. So, for example, at the interviews, that when there are questions about research, could there be questions saying, how would the research relate to your teaching nexus? How do your teaching values influence your research and engagement with community? Finding some examples and maybe make it explicit to managers and leaders of saying, this is how you can activate TP in the way you operate the discipline. But participants overwhelmingly said, we need more conversations about teaching confidence and teaching capacity, because we believe that could strengthen, especially in the current times, the resilience and sustainability of our institution. So this is a very, very new area. Yes, I definitely will work more in that, but those questions are exactly the ones that go into that next stage. Thank you.
Fantastic question and fantastic response. I think we've got time for one more question here from Mohammed.
Can I go first? I have a presentation and I have to rush to the other room. Why? Because just last Monday, I teach a doctoral program in educational leadership in one of the campuses. This is an American university, but the campus is in China. So most of my students are teachers or administrators. So, and we were talking about teaching philosophy for some reason, and that's why I became excited to come here. And we were just discussing, and the students, while I was asking them, what is your teaching philosophy, because you teach for so many years, they asked me a question, what is your teaching philosophy? So they're trying to know, and I told them, look, I believe that every child can learn, because I have been teaching in schools for several years before I moved into higher education. And then one of the students, a lecturer, he said, no, I don't believe that every child can learn. And we had a great discussion on that, and it was very interesting, because we started talking about the normal curve and the students at the left and extra support, equity issues, and all those things. It was difficult. I mean, I was not trying to convince, but I was trying to put forward. I went back to some psychology. My wife is a psychology professor, so I know a little bit. So I mentioned that, every child has an innate ability to learn, but if you are teaching at this level, and if you find that your child doesn't have the requisite knowledge that you think he should possess, it is not the fault of the child, because he was saying the child doesn't want to learn. And I had objections on that you just can't say that a child doesn't want to learn. You need to put some of the blame on the teachers that he had or the family background. So that was very interesting. But when we talk about philosophy, most of the time teachers look at their teaching philosophy from their point of view. They forget the learners. And I don't think that teaching philosophy is pure philosophy alone if you do not include learners in your philosophy. So this was one comment that I just wanted to make about teaching philosophy. And of course, thank you very much. It was a wonderful presentation. I would like to read your article. It's free, so I would get it.
Thank you, Mohammed. That was great. And that's really one important area. Teaching philosophy allows you to open up those doors and talk about pedagogies and understanding your learners and where you are on that spectrum, obviously, between teaching beliefs and learning beliefs. So thank you for that question. I look forward. Please send me an email if you're interested.
Yes, thank you, Mohammed. And good luck with your presentation as well. We have come to the end of our time here, so I don't want to hold anyone else up so that they can jump across to their next presentation that they'll be attending. I'd like to once again extend a big thank you to Dr. Gisa Ruger from the Central Queensland University for her presentation here today. Please, you can connect with Gisa through this platform as well. If you'd like to continue the conversation, it's really wonderful to hear a focus on the importance of teaching philosophy, not as indulgent navel gazing, perhaps, as it might be seen, but as something that can have really important sort of macro, meso, and micro kind of impacts at an individual and at an institutional level. So thank you so much, Gisa, for your presentation. Thank you all for joining us, and please, everyone, enjoy the rest of the conference here today.
Thank you. Thanks, Callum, and thanks, Sam.